All right, hello class, and welcome to part two of the Cold War lecture. We're going to do slides 12 through 16, the conclusion here. Starting with slide 12, the GI Bill. I want to jump right into this. The GI Bill is essentially something that some of you may have heard of. If you've spoken to a military recruiter at all on campus when we were back in school, one of the perks the military offers is the GI Bill. If you give your years of service to the military, you can use the GI Bill to help pay for college when your service concludes. So the reason the GI Bill was passed is you had all these veterans returning home from World War II, right? They saved the world. They went over to Europe, Africa, and Asia, the Pacific. They got involved in this conflict, and they come back and they want normalcy. Well, the GI Bill was going to finance that normalcy. Um, so that's one of the first things that we cover in regard to the domestic aspects of the Cold War. Looking at slide 13, we shift to the baby boom. So the baby boom, and you may have heard the term baby boomers before. The baby boomers are the generation of people that were born from like 1945 through like the mid 1960s. And the baby boomers, it was essentially a time period when you had this huge spike in the birth rate. Once again, it makes sense. Normalcy. These soldiers come home and they want a normal life, right? They want to live a normal life. They want a family. And you had a large number of children born during this time period. And, you can see it on slide 13 where I alluded to it. I talked about the economic shockwaves of the baby boomers. So, like right now, the baby boomers are old, right? And they're collecting Social Security and they're taxing the Social Security system. Well, in the beginning, it was you needed more hospitals because you had all these babies. You needed more birthing units in hospitals. And then it was, well, you needed more schools. You needed more teachers. And then, by the time that they got, to like the age 18 to 25 bracket, oh, we need more jobs. So the baby boomers have sent shockwaves through, really the American economy as they have aged. I'm going to move on to slide 14, which is the interstate highway system. It was the interstate highway system, and once again, teaching juniors, you guys should understand this, the interstate highways class. These are the highways, they're federal highways, so they're funded by the federal government, which go interstate, so they travel from one state to another. So from Ellenville, the closest interstate would probably be 84, which is just outside of Middletown. If you get on 84 and you head east, it'll take you into Connecticut, right? If you head west, it'll take you into Pennsylvania, okay? And these interstates are all across the country. And really what they do is they connect the cities and they move commerce. I'm going to put the Cars scene up, the scene from the movie Cars, the Disney Pixar film. And really, what is Cars all about? Radiator Springs, yeah, it's a fictitious town, but it really gets into how when you built these interstates, all the money stayed on those interstates, and towns that are off the interstate have been on periods of economic decline. Look at our own community. We're 25 miles from interstate. Go to Kingston to get 87. Go to Middletown to get 84. And you've seen economic decline. We're kind of a version of Radiator Springs. The interstate highway system also created the suburbs. Those suburbs are the areas in the outskirts of the city. So if New York is our city, right? These suburbs would be Long Island and Westchester, places where people could live not too far from the city. They could still have a house. They didn't have to live in an apartment in a crowded city like New York. Excuse me. And they could have a yard, and they could kind of have a more country-esque life, but not quite like a rural area like where we live. The expression that sociologists use when they describe the impact of the suburbs on the city is that the cities were left black, brown, and broke because of white flight. White Americans flooded to the suburbs, and you're going to get to explore the suburbs in one of the lessons I put together this week. Moving on to slide 15. When we look at slide 15, we kind of shift gears here and we get into McCarthyism. Senator Joe McCarthy, a Republican senator from Wisconsin, piggybacked on this idea of, fear of communism. To be labeled a communist during the Cold War was obviously not a good thing. That's what we were fighting against. That's what we were trying to contain. That's what we were trying to stop during the Cold War. And McCarthy basically went on a witch hunt for communists. And he used the TV. The TV was the new method. It was in this post World War II period when the television came about. When the television came about, McCarthy became a household name. He became famous and later infamous. He accused all kinds of people of being communists. Were they really communists? No. He would say, in my hands, I hold a list of 200 plus card-carrying communists who work for the U.S. State Department. It was all a campaign to playing on people's fears and to make himself look good, and use it to go after opponents, political opponents. What would ultimately lead to McCarthy's downfall is when he made accusations against military officials, and he was kind of exposed on TV as being someone who really didn't have any credible evidence. So that's another example of how the Cold War kind of impacted life. And let's take a look at slide 16 on here, where I jump into the Truman and Eisenhower doctrines. And class, we've talked about doctrines. We talked about the Monroe Doctrine. We talked about the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. A doctrine is a presidential foreign policy statement. So the Truman Doctrine would be Truman's presidential foreign policy statement. The Eisenhower Doctrine would be Eisenhower's presidential foreign policy statement. Understand, what are these? They're really, class, just pledges of we're going to give money to other countries so communism doesn't spread there. The Truman Doctrine sent money to Turkey and Greece. The Eisenhower Doctrine sent money to the Middle East to stop the spread of communism. This was another way of fighting the Cold War, just like the Berlin Airlift, which I told you about yesterday. The Marshall Plan. So we're fighting communism without this massive ground war. We're propping up governments and using money and wealth. Don't worry about slide 17. We'll get to the Korean War and the Vietnam War at some point in the near future. I hope you guys are all doing well. If you have any questions, send me an email. And I miss you.